up in Miami, I'd probably do that.
You're there. You're live.
Hey, everybody, and everybody in person.
Yeah.
Welcome. Can you guys hear me on the Zoom? Okay, good. Welcome to CEO Netweavers monthly speaker series. We are a community of CEOs and C-suite executives who connect to netweave with each other and to pay it forward. We have a lot of pay it forward work that we do. So my name is Cordelia Blake. I am the executive director. Our president and vice president and other president, I don't know his exact title. What's the first? Chairman, sorry. We're not able to make it, so I get to chat with you guys. And then our speaker will be here in just a minute.
Here, just use this. Use the arrow buttons to advance it.
Oh, look at that. So CEO Netweavers, our two core pay it forward programs are our Inflection Point program, which is where we help companies that are facing some kind of transition, major transition. And we give them a panel of 4 to 6 CEOs for about 4 to 6 months to help them strategize and make that connection, make that inflection, I should say. And that's been a very successful program. We've helped over 70 companies make huge transitions. We also have our mentorship program where we work primarily with executive MBA students to help them also kind of figure out how to get, most of them want to be C-suite bound, and that's part of why they're doing the EMBA, and so we kind of help them with the mentorship piece of that. We do some mentorship through our foundation, the Sion Foundation, where we give scholarships to students who were graduates of the Rowan Clark Academy when they're in college. They get a paired scholarship and mentor to help them also kind of navigate their lives. We had our first 4 recipients of that last year, and they're just amazing students, and they're doing amazing things. And so we do a little bit of mentoring for undergraduate students as well. And then we also are working with our Houston office. They're doing some mentorship with Rice University in Houston. So our members are people who are up to big things and they want to pay it forward. We have a number of programs we offer to our members and our friends, and this is one of them. We have an amazing monthly speaker series. We also have some happy hours where people can just casually connect. We have a book club. This is our monthly, you have to read the book club. Oh, thank you. We have somebody come on in. So we do invite you to read, and we have pretty deep conversations about the book and how you can actually apply it. So it's always nice to read business books and be inspired by them, but how do you actually take that and turn it into action? And that's what we focus on in our book club. And then we are also open to new programs. So if there is something that you feel would empower your business or empower your pay it forward activities, you know, let's do it. So that's us. And then this is our leadership team right now. We have our president, vice president, Dave and Eric, and they're both C-suite execs in their own companies. And then John Vandy, who's the president of G Firm in Houston, is in charge of our Houston chapter. So welcome. So today we are going to, we did already the netweaving part. Our announcements are, we have, I'll get to that in a minute. I'm doing Chris's part because I guess he got held up in traffic or something. Mike is going to introduce our speaker, and our speaker is Jason Jones, who is an expert in work from anywhere. And then we will do a quick close and save the date, and anyone's welcome to stay and chit chat afterwards, both online and in person. And we are trying to make it so you guys can chat online, but also be heard here. So that's a work in progress for us. So please feel free to type in the chat. I will be monitoring that shortly. And Kelly Biggs, our marketing chair, is also monitoring that on Zoom. So we will be able to unmute and you can actually physically ask your questions. That's the plan anyway. Just in terms of announcements, at the end of this month, we have our book club, which is the book Indistractable. and it's about how distracted we all get and how to stop that. And then next month, we have Tino Mantella speaking about something, what is
Leadership challenges.
leadership challenges and work from anywhere. So that's what we have on the immediate future. All right, so now I'm going to introduce Mike Blake, our program chair, to introduce our speaker.
All right, thank you. All right, so before I get started, I just realized I need to nudge this because otherwise people can't see the screen. We're here.
Yeah.
Turns out I'm much better at buying this stuff than I am at setting it up.
Can you adjust the zoom? I don't know if you can or not on that, because they don't need to see the screen in the back, but they just need to see the speaker.
I don't think I can.
Okay.
Not at this late time. I could
Yeah,
research
right.
it, but I probably can't. So make sure it doesn't tip over. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Mike Blake, I'm the speaker chair, and I'm delighted to introduce my longtime friend, Jason Jones, who is a principal at Cresa, which is a tenant representation firm nationwide now. He and I have known each other for at least 15 years, at least one kid ago for each. And one of us has at least one college-age kid now. But you know, Jason has a fascinating background. You know, he's your MBA is from Duke, I think, right? Is that
Undergrad
from Duke?
Arizona State MBA.
With this slide, there's a slide about Jason.
Oh, okay. There we go. He also served our country in the U.S. Navy, flying A6 intruders, I think. Is that right?
Correct.
So thank you for your service. He's also very active in helping veterans make the transition from military life into civilian life and transferring their skills and experience into a civilian capacity. So he continues to serve our country in that way. But I wanted to bring him in here today because as most of you remember, this is the year of talent. All of our speaking engagements this year have to do with the development, the attraction, the retention, compensation of talent. And I think that there's no more hotly contested discussion around talent right now in terms of where people work, right? Do you work from home? Do you work from Starbucks? Do you come to an office? How often do you come to the office? When you go to the office, what do you do? And I wanted to bring Jason in to talk about this because in a way, it's kind of like only Nixon can go to China, right? What impressed me about Jason is that many people, I think, in his industry would have an incentive to try to run away from work from anywhere, right? Because it means people buying less office space, less revenue for companies that are tenant representation firms, theoretically. And Jason, I think, has been very smart, and he's gone the opposite way. He's positioned himself as effectively a location consultant, right? If you're going to have a distributed workforce, some of which is going to be in an office someplace, some of it is going to be entirely maybe on the other side of the planet, how do you sort of make all of that work, right? And so I had him on the podcast to talk a little bit about this sort of adjacent subject about 18 months ago, and it was a very well received podcast, over 300,000 downloads, by the way. So
Nice.
Somebody heard it. But you know, now that we're in this trans-pandemic period, and I don't know when the exit pandemic, there may not be an exit pandemic period, I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I have no idea. There may be there are plenty of letters in the Greek alphabet. We don't know when another wave is going to come up, right? But this question now, one of the things that has occurred with the pandemic is our fundamental relationship with work as a society has changed. And I'm not going to open a debate as to whether you think that's for the better or for the worse, but I think it's inarguable that it has changed. And where we do our work is one of those questions. So I'm so thrilled that Jason has agreed to come in and take time out of his busy schedule to educate us on this, because it is a brave new world out there. You know, we always sort of read like when we were going to have flying cars and we were all going to have jetpacks and so forth. We were also being able, everybody would work from wherever they wanted to, but we didn't think it was going to happen overnight. And we didn't think necessarily that once it happened overnight, they weren't just gonna all sort of run screaming out of our houses and go back to the office, right? We don't know what's gonna happen. So best practices are emerging and they're evolving, they're changing every day. So I hope you're as excited as I am to welcome Jason here and hear what he has to say, because I think we're gonna learn a ton. I'm going to learn a ton. Jason Jones, welcome to CEO Netweavers.
Thank you. There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. Set this down. Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's always a lot of fun to get together with you, and I've enjoyed our relationship over the years. And hello to everyone who is here in the room. Hello to everyone who is out on Zoom, which is our new world, of course. Yeah, today we are going to talk about best practices for working from anywhere. And this is a topic that I find really, really interesting. It is counterintuitive for someone who comes from the corporate real estate advisory world to have embraced this, but I think it just makes a lot of sense. I think it's the way, early on, I believed it was the way the world was going to go, and I thought there was a lot of opportunity to help companies through that transition, nonprofit organizations as well as for-profit organizations, and we've worked with a lot of both. So we're going to get to it. And I just want to say some of the slides that you're going to see today are really meant for distribution to you after the meeting. So I sent a PDF to Cordelia that can be sent out immediately after the meeting. And there's some things on there that are sort of checklists for you all to be able to review on your own or with your own teams. So there's a couple slides that are a little bit busy, but again, that's what it's for. And I just sort of wanted to forewarn you. All right, so we'll start with a quote. This is from Kirsten Robinson, who is Chief People Officer at Ford. And she said, and this was about 6 to 8 months ago, if there's one thing that we've learned over the past 12 months, it is that our assumptions around work and what employees need has shifted. There's a key word there, which is assumptions. So I want to point this out, that whatever our own mindset is and assumptions that we bring to this conversation, I want you to keep an open mind because there's a lot to learn. And I have talked to scores of companies over the past 2 years. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. So it's important to keep your mindset open as you think about this. But I also wanted to point out this, well, first off, let me tell you what their policy is. Their hybrid workforce policy at Ford is that any non-site specific employees, obviously that means people who aren't working on the factory line that have to go into the office. So non-site specific employees can work with their supervisor, keyword, work with their supervisor to work either remotely or from any campus location as often as they like. So they got to work with their supervisor, but it can be anywhere they want as often as they like, which is an amazingly flexible hybrid workforce policy when you think about it. During the pandemic, they took 30,000 of their employees to the Dearborn headquarters, moved them all out, reformatted their office space in preparation for this new way of working. So this is a very forward-thinking approach for not Google, not Facebook, not Box, not Twitter, not Slack. We're talking about Ford Motor Company in the staid 100-year-old auto industry. So I think that's a really great place to start. And if you do move forward down a path like that, which nearly everyone is doing to some degree or in some way, you're going to need a plan. Just like Ford figured out a plan. And by the way, Kirsten has another quote where she said, we don't expect our current plan to be the end-all plan. We expect we're going to calibrate over time. And that's another best practice, is to really have that mindset that it's okay to take a chance, to come up with a plan and communicate to everyone and recognize this is going to change over time. Because right now, a lot of people feel like the guy on the screen, which is there's 100 different ways to go. We don't know what we don't know, because this is all really on this scale, very new. Working remotely is not new. That has been there for quite some time, but on this scale with everybody, a corporate-wide policy, that's new. So there's a lot of different directions to go, and these arrows represent all the different opinions about where any particular organization should go, or any department or any team. So it's a lot to navigate. So the questions, though, that are being answered as part of this are things like, what is the right hybrid strategy for our team? What is the organizational infrastructure that we need in order to be successful? And I'm going to explain what I mean by organizational infrastructure as we go through this. How do we make it equitable? I get that question a lot from the companies that I talk to. And one of my questions is, well, what exactly do you mean by equitable? Do you mean the same for everybody, or do you mean it's fair? So that's a question that needs to be asked, because it might be different for different employees, but they want to sense that it's fair or equitable across the board. And then a question that we get a lot also is, tell us what to do. Just what do we do? So if these are the questions that are on your mind about this topic, you've come to the right place. CEO Netweavers, excuse me. So the things that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about 3 key elements for a successful hybrid strategy. We'll talk about how to build consensus and the importance of building consensus in your organization about the path forward. We'll talk about the organizational infrastructure required for a successful plan. I'll explain what I mean by organizational infrastructure. We're going to talk about employee work style arrangements. These are the different ways that employees will work going forward, and how you have to really understand that, think about that, and plan for the right infrastructure to support them, depending on how they work. Whoops. I'm going to go through some sample guidelines of a plan from a real live project that we did with one of our clients to give you some detail. And it can get a little bit granular, some of this. And remember, some of this is for you to review and digest later, but it gets granular pretty quick when you get into the guidelines for a plan. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some specific best practices. All of these other number 1 through 5, they are best practices about how to approach this, but then we're going to get some specific best practices about how to hold a hybrid meeting, or specific best practices for technology. So 3 is a magic number. So 3 key elements for a successful hybrid plan. The first is change your mindset. And I started with this because I think it's sort of foundational to a conversation about this. Many of you have changed your mindset from pre-pandemic to almost post-pandemic, or to hopefully tail end, about hybrid working, about remote working, and about your own working. But I still talk to a number of people, a number of leaders and organizations out there who are, there's a bit of hand-wringing going on about how are we going to get our employees back to the office. And I just want to encourage everyone to change your mindset from thinking about how do we go back to the past, in a sense, to how do we take advantage of what we've learned over the past 2 years, and let's leverage this going forward for the optimal way of working. So changing your mindset is a big sort of foundational start to the whole conversation. The next is be sequential to be successful. This is important for any large change management project, really any project. As Mike mentioned, I come from the world of naval aviation. Naval aviation, all aviation is very checklist oriented. We do things in order and we read the checklist every time. Things like, don't forget to lower the landing gear. That's important. We read that checklist every single time out loud, not just in our head, but out loud. So I'm a big believer in going in order, being sequential. And what's important here, and this is sort of an overall framework that I want to show you. I believe that at the top of all organizations, what the most important qualities are leadership and culture. And you could argue that culture is the most important, but I think you don't get culture without good leadership. I think it starts at the top. But leadership and culture, they're the umbrella that overhangs all success. They lead to certain business goals like operational productivity, recruiting, retaining talent, financial results. We want to maximize those. But in order to maximize those, you've got to be sequential to be successful. My organization, we view things through the lens of commercial real estate, office space, where you're going to occupy space, which is now occupying space at home or the coffee shop or the hotel lobby or the airport lot, whatever. But it's important to go in order, and it's important to start with the human component of the workforce. So this is a best practice. Don't go straight to what are we going to do about bringing people back to the office? What are we going to do with how much space we have or how it's designed? Start with what are the needs of the people who help you achieve the vision and mission of your organization? How do you support them? And then it flows naturally downstream to, well, how do we design the built environment for them where they congregate in person? And then come up with a real estate strategy to do that. Where should it be? How much should it cost? Should it be near our customers, et cetera? So be sequential to be successful is a key best practice for navigating hybrid work. And then the third key element is leadership. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's the most important thing. This is a time for leaders to step up, be courageous, take some chances, and lead their organization through this change. Now, there is a fourth bonus key element. It's like key element 3.5. And it's just a concept that I want to share with you. And again, this is about a mindset. Something that has happened during the pandemic as it regards the workforce and the workplace is an innate human desire has been ignited. And that desire is for freedom. Freedom to choose where you work, when you work, how you work. That is a powerful emotion that should be tapped into and should be leveraged, because when you tap into something as powerful as the feeling of freedom for choice, you get a lot of benefits. Number one is employee satisfaction. Employee satisfaction leads to greater engagement, and greater engagement leads to a whole host of additional benefits, such as lower turnover, less absenteeism, better customer engagement, lower customer churn, which leads to higher customer lifetime value, which ultimately leads to higher profits. So it can start with something as simple and fundamental as important and powerful as freedom that an employee feels about how he or she works, where they work, when they work, et cetera. And you'll see this, there are stars, there are asterisks on some of these. Those are the things that you can measure. So if you create a new hybrid workforce policy or strategy, and these things go up, then you're headed down the right path. If these things start to go down, then you need to course correct and recalibrate. You had a question. We have a question in the back.
I can wait, but I'm dying to wait to ask a question. I can wait.
Okay, no, we can go ask it now. I think this should be
all right.
interactive. It's great.
Well, there is a term of art in my particular area called presenteeism. Are you familiar with that term? All right. The idea is being at work, but not fully being at work.
Right.
Typically, health issues can compromise performance while at work. Right?
Yes.
Right, and actually there's a good bit of evidence to suggest that the impact on overall performance is via presenteeism that actually outweighs absenteeism considerably in many contexts. Okay. That leads to a larger question. How has the evaluation of performance shifted?
Yeah.
I'm sure you're getting at this, but I'm really dying to hear more about it. Just put that out there.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone could hear, but the question was asked about presenteeism, which is, in my understanding, is you're present physically, but you're not really present mentally. You're not engaged while you're at the workplace, at your desk, in front of your screen. You're distracted. You may have a health issue in your own, or you may just have something you're worried about and you're just not there. Or you may be disengaged and you don't like the work that you're doing. You're present, but you're not really present.
That's right.
Presenteeism.
Yeah.
And that actually has a greater effect on productivity, perhaps even than absenteeism. So the question was, how do we now measure performance And how is that changing?
How is that shifting in this new world?
So here's the thing, it should be shifting. I'm not sure that everybody has gotten on the bus to really start to change the way they evaluate performance, because it should be performance, not presence. And that's something that we preach all the time. And there is systems, there's a whole school of thought around performance management, which is you can use tools, and it's a process to help measure the output. And you've got to, this takes a while. You've got to sit down and figure out, okay, what are we measuring specifically for this particular job description? And then how are we going to measure it? And then how do we communicate that to the employee so they get feedback? And then how do we get feedback from the employee? So there is a whole school of thought around performance management, and there are technology tools that help support that, that are, in my opinion, should be growing. I just don't know how much it has yet. Because frankly, we really, as a world, I mean, because this is a worldwide issue, haven't really moved into full scale hybrid working yet. It's happening now. So I hope that helps. Okay, let me keep going. So the second important thing that we're talking about today, best practices around building consensus. And before you can build consensus and get your leadership team to move forward with a certain plan, you got to ask a certain question. Or I think a great way to start. So this is a best practice, is get everybody on board asking the question of what's the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that, number one, is reflective of our culture, but number two, minimizes expenses and the threat to business continuity while maximizing productivity, recruiting and retention, as well as financial results. So it's a best practice to just keep the big picture in mind as you're going down this path. Oh, excuse me. I didn't click forward. So those, anyways, productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results. But you've also then, before you can go down the road with a particular strategy, you've got to understand the benefits and the challenges. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the benefits and the challenges. This is one of those checklist items that you can talk about as a team. But something that I wanted to pause just for a moment is to make sure that your teams are considering bias, because everyone brings a certain view. There's a lot of opinions about working remotely and working in the office, or et cetera. And that can blind you. So it's important for your team to get together and actually say out loud, here are the benefits of what I think is best. You know, there's some folks, I'm an introvert. I love working from home. I don't have to be around anybody. I can just work around. I can choose when I get onto a Zoom call. And that's very different than someone who's an extrovert who's dying to be back in the office and be around people. And nobody's right or wrong, and there's great strengths in both, but someone who is an extrovert and wants to be in the office with other people might be the loudest voice in the room and say, let me tell you all the benefits and everything that we're missing and why remote work is so terrible. Well, the other voices in the room need to be heard also. And this is a best practice, is to get together and make sure you're saying out loud what those different benefits and challenges are. So quickly, remote work benefits. We've experienced a lot of this over the past 2 years. They're on the screen. I won't read through all of these. And then there's all the benefits of the office, which are really time proven, and I think have crystallized, because there are things that organizations have missed without having people together in person. That in-person collaboration, there's really no substitute that for certain types of collaboration. So this would be something that I would recommend that you walk through with your teams, is a checklist like this. But there's also something that's very interesting that's only a benefit of hybrid working, where you have both, which is recruiting and retaining talent. Because 70 to 80%, I mean, there's a number of surveys that have come out during the pandemic, time and time and time again, they all float around 70 to 80% of employees want a choice. They want a hybrid environment, which means you're going to have to offer both in order to recruit and retain the best and the brightest, because they want that freedom of choice. So I'm going to talk about one challenge that leads to the organizational infrastructure required to support it. And there are many challenges, but one scenario challenge is where you have different profiles of people who are now working in your organization because of how they're working. The first is you've got a set of people who come into the office 3 days a week and they're at home 2 days a week, or maybe vice versa. Then you've got another set of people who are in the office 100% of the time that they work, but it's a flexible schedule. The culture now accepts remote working or, working from home every now and then. And if you have to go home because someone's got to come home early from school, whatever the case may be, everyone accepts that you're working, you're not just goofing off. And then there's the third profile, which is their default is at home, but they come into the office periodically. So you've got 3 different profiles. How do you manage for this all at the same time? So this next slide is really key to understanding how to go about a hybrid workforce strategy. You've got to answer questions around what are our human resource policies? What is our information technology that supports this? How do we measure performance? What training do we need in this new environment? Cybersecurity, what issues do we have now with the threats at the edge, as they say, which would be someone's home? And what is your real estate strategy? And what is the space design going to be? So those are the questions that you've got to address as you work through these challenges. Now, some specific challenges that result from a scenario like that are coming up on the screen. This is just a number that I've heard over the past couple of years. And I'm curious as they show up. There we go. If anyone else has experienced these or what they think they might see as a challenge. You mentioned, sir, in the back about how do you measure performance? I think that's a great one. Does anyone else online or here in the room have any challenges that they've experienced so far in this new way of working? Cordelia.
I would just say that HR almost is absent from all the, like, if there's an issue with HR, now I have a more flexible work arrangement, but I just from conversationally.
Yeah.
It's completely, there's like no default HR supervision.
Interesting. So no supervision in what sense?
Well, like if you have an issue in an office, like in theory, if somebody, let's say somebody was being sexist.
Right.
Or something like a racist or something like that.
Yeah.
Theoretically, there could be like witnesses to it. You could go sit in somebody's office privately, talk to them.
Right.
There's more of like you can see what's happening. But in remote, it's completely at the person has to like go out of their way to like ask for HR help.
I see.
And then they have to like prove it, and it's more. I
Just
see that with texting too. Like it's part of it is hybrid Zooms, and part of it is like now people text each other for work, and there's like almost no proof of what happened, right?
I see.
So it's very hard if you're having an issue to deal with it.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone online could hear Cordelia, but she was saying there's a challenge around the human resources in an organization, particularly if you as an employee had an issue with someone. Perhaps you're in a there's a sexism. Perhaps there's some, I don't know, there's some type of discrimination. It's harder to just be right there and be present and then prove it, or it's harder to go out of your way to get to HR to talk about that problem. So yeah, that's an HR issue. They're going to have to deal with that challenge. Mike.
So one of the issues we had with our team when the pandemic started, we sent everybody home, was their home environments were not set up to get work done. You know, I've had one who since moved out, he was still living with his parents, right? He was trying to get work, real work done at a kitchen table.
Yeah.
And another with 2 kids that all of a sudden had no daycare, right? And was difficult. And on top of that, both were extroverts. I could tell that by talking to them that they were emotionally struggling.
That's right.
Right. And it wasn't morale per se from the work, because I don't think it was, they're still here.
Yeah.
But it was simply that the offices are designed, presumably by experts like you, to facilitate work,
Yes.
right? But then all of a sudden being kicked out of the office and say, okay, your Herman Miller chair is going away and your desk credenza are going away, but you have a 13-inch laptop, go figure it out, kid.
Yes.
That's, and try to do that with cats and kids and deliveries and leaf blowers.
Right.
It's really hard.
Yes. So great. And again, so that everyone knows, Mike was talking about the challenges of working from home when you don't have a good setup to be productive at home. You have a lot of distractions, perhaps children if they're homesick. Going forward, we hope it will be different to where the kids will be in school, but there's still the distraction of the leaf blower and cats, etc. So that's again, and there are ways to deal with that, which are either going forward, if you can offer a hybrid, you can say, you know what, you get to work in the office and we're going to set you up here. But if you want to work from home, we're also going to help out there depending on how much, because now we can make your dedicated desk at the office a hot desk that's shared with other people. That saves us some money, and now we can help you with your setup at home, perhaps provide a stipend for your internet service, etc. In different companies, there's different, I don't know if there's a best practice around that, but there are different philosophies around how to help employees with their home office setup. But anyways, the important thing here is your organization needs to sit around a table, the leaders, and I would recommend a core team, and talk about what these challenges are likely to be, or the ones that you as an organization are experiencing now, and go through your process of figuring out how are we going to deal with these. And one way that's important to deal with them is you've got to put the right organizational infrastructure in place. And by that, I mean the different departments of an organization, such as human resources, information technology, finance, operations, real estate, etc. All of these, and you will see developing on the screen. And this is one of these checklist slides. So we're not going to read through every single one of these bullet points, but this is something that you can take and look at later and say, how are we doing? Or how do we think we're going to address all these different areas? Because I always liken it to a symphony. An organization has different parts. You have the wind instruments, you have the horn, the brass, you've got strings, you've got percussion, and all of them need to be playing well together in order to create harmony. If they don't talk to each other, and if there's not a conductor, you're going to have a disharmonious piece of music. So make sure that you, and each section of the symphony, of the orchestra, needs to know their stuff and needs to be the contributor and have thought through what it is that they're contributing to the organization and what challenges they are going to face as they roll this out. So anyway, so these are the things that I would recommend going through. Just want to check how we're doing on time. Okay. And by the way, I think it's important to know this is what top talent's looking for. Whether they're saying it out loud or not, they're thinking it in their head. They're thinking as they look at your organization, am I gonna, could be a number of questions, have to work at the office every day of the week? Am I going to not be able to work at the office because I want a place to come in because I have a lot of distractions at home? What is the policy gonna be? What kind of freedom am I gonna have? And they're looking for an organization that can say, this is our plan. We might have to recalibrate. We're gonna have to see how things go, but this is our plan and we are set up to support you and your career growth and your success here. Because we have thought through human resources, information technology, operations, finance, real estate, etc. So again, it's a best practice to go through all these things. Now, number 4, employee work style arrangements. This is really important, and this is another couple of for later review slides, but the concept is important. In your organization, there are going to be people who want to work and are best working, most productive, most engaged, working in different work style arrangements. On the screen, you see 3. One, and this is just an example, would be they're on site most of the time. 2 would be a hybrid. And there's a whole lot of blends for what hybrid really means. It could be they're going to work X number of days per week in the office, X number of days at home. What days of the week is that going to be? It could be a percentage of time. We just want you to average 50%, which could mean 3 days this month and 27 days the next month. So there's a whole bunch of different options, but you really need to understand how those are set up. And the way that I created a spreadsheet, because other than the matters of heart, almost everything can be solved with a good spreadsheet. This is something that you should think through. And this is just an example. Instead of going through every line item, and this breaks down into how many days per week, is this going to be required, et cetera. I want to point out, and Mike gave me a laser pointer. So you've got, well, you can't see because the Zoom thing at the top, but at the top, this says expectations of employees. And here it is corporate commitments. That's an important way to break this down, is communicate to the employee, here's what we expect of you. You are a work style arrangement that's going to be working in the office 2 days per week. Maybe it's up to 3 days per week, whatever it is. And we expect you, or maybe you are an employee that is working remotely 100% of the time, but our expectation is that you will travel to our headquarters office for all hands meetings. Or you can live wherever you want, but we're going to give you notice 2 days in advance for any on-site meeting, and you have to make it here on your own dime. We recommend you live in town, but you can live somewhere else if you want to, but you need to be able to fly and get here. So you set expectations for the employee. The other is, what are the corporate commitments? Based on that work style arrangement, we as an organization commit to you that we will provide you a dedicated desk, computer, et cetera, in the office. Or if you're mostly remote, we're going to provide a hot desk for you there, but we will set you up with a home office. So that's the concept, is communicate what the corporation's going to do, the organization, and communicate expectations of the employee. Now, guidelines for the policy. This comes from a real live engagement where we helped an organization, a global organization, come up with their hybrid workforce strategy. And we created 8 pillars. And I think that this is important. Anyone can use these 8 pillars as a foundation for their hybrid strategy. And just ask yourself these questions. I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail, but I will point out the first 3, and I'm just going to read these. Number 1, it's pretty obvious, frequency of the time in the office, or you can say it the other way, frequency of time in the home. Who makes the decision? That is a key question. Is it one person at the top, the CEO or the executive director? Is it the employee just decides and there's nobody else telling that person where and when to show up? Or is it something in between? Perhaps it's the hiring manager, perhaps it's the team leader, perhaps it's the department head. You've got to figure out who has authority to make this decision, who's going to make the decision. And then there's going to be variations and exceptions that you need to think about. Which days of the week will they be in the office? If you have a policy that's 3 days a week in the office, are you telling them it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Or are you saying any 3 days you want? Just make it 3 days. The issue that you run into there, you've got to think about is there is a need in many organizations for cross-functional collaboration. There are certain departments that need to be in person with other departments, so they need to know when those people are going to be in the office. So it gets granular pretty quick here, but those are the things to think through. And this is, again, examples of what we'd help someone with. So one guideline, frequency in the office. This particular organization, they had some on-site required roles or site-specific roles like Ford. They had warehouse workers and lab workers, got to be in the lab or the warehouse, 100%. But there's hybrid eligible employees, and that was everybody else. And in this case, they decided on 3 days per week. But then there were questions around which 3 days. And so we helped them address that also. Who makes the decision? In this particular organization, it was the hiring manager. They felt was the best person to make that decision. Basically, the direct report, whoever is the direct report. But then it's important to understand, can someone overrule that hiring manager? And you've got to put policies in place to deal with that, to make it somewhat flexible. And I'll go to then which days of the week. I talked about that. In this particular organization, we left that up to the department heads. So it wasn't the hiring manager deciding it for their team. Instead, it was the department head who had all the teams underneath her or him. So it's just a lot of detail to think through, but you could read through this later, as I had mentioned. And then now we get to the final agenda item today, which are specific best practices. And these are ones that I just kind of want to talk through with you. I'll be interested in feedback that you may have. But the first around, so there's 3 different areas that I was going to discuss. One is setting a culture of expectations. The other is technology. And then there was best practices for hybrid meetings. So as far as a culture of expectations, a best practice is to have a team or a larger organization sit down and talk about what is going to be our culture for core hours, when we expect everyone to be available. It's important to set that because it's changing with hybrid working. Is it the normal traditional 8 to 5 or 9 to 5? Or is it going to shift for some departments and some employees? Therefore, we're going to have a window in the middle of the day where everybody in the organization is available. The next would be simple things like, what's our expectation for response time on email? I just picked email. Could be chat. Could be something else. Is it we expect for you or for everyone within an hour, within 24 hours? So set an expectation. Hours, the same thing. Hours available for instant messaging. Should we have no meeting days? That's actually becoming more popular, where people are saying, we don't set any meetings. I mean, I have dealt with some I've worked with some organizations where I've tried to schedule a interview, a discovery interview for a consulting engagement, and they've sent me their calendar, and it is solid booked. And they tell me when I finally have a conversation with them is, I'm having Zoom fatigue. Really, it's meeting fatigue. And there's some best practices around that I'll get to. But so you get the idea. And I'll go through these. Actually, let me get them all on the screen. So again, sort of a checklist to work through. Are there any on here that resonate or do you have a question about before I move on to technology best practices? Cordelia.
I think the camera on and off policy is really interesting because it's very jarring. Like if I prepare for a meeting and I have my hair, whatever, and then somebody shows up and they're going, sorry, it's just in the gym, I'm not gonna have my camera on, it's jarring. Because there is something about that looking at somebody in the face, even if it's online. So I think that's a really good idea to set kind of an expectation so that people, again, you know, who's deciding and kind of what the general plan is.
That's right. Yeah, so Cordelia was talking about the camera on, camera off, just for those who are online, and how it's jarring when you have prepared to present face-to-face on video conference and other people don't turn on their camera. So you don't really know, are you talking to them or not? And it's jarring. So it's important as an organization to set, you could set a policy, but then there's also the concept of cultural expectation, where it's maybe not a policy, very much makes sense on certain meetings to have a policy. Camera's on, that's our policy, it needs to be on. But other times it is sort of just culturally. And maybe it's culturally for some meetings where we don't turn them on because we're tired of being on camera. Just depends on the meeting. But it's important to communicate and talk about it is the best practice. Cordelia.
I would add like a Zoom dress code almost.
Zoom dress code, another cultural expectation.
The reason why people don't go on camera is because they're not made up and they don't have work clothes on. So it's like, is it okay to come in a t-shirt?
Right.
If you're, a lot of companies could care less.
That's
so
correct.
Then show up in your t-shirt and sweats. We just want to talk to you.
That's right.
But you can set those expectations.
Exactly. And it just takes talking about it. So very good. All right. Any others on the cultural expectations? Any other questions? Okay, so best practices for technology. I'll just bring all these up because we got 4 minutes left. There's some neat stuff that's happening now in technology. I'll just talk about the second to the last, acoustic fencing and whiteboarding technology. This is really cool. This is Zoom, Cisco, Vonage, you name it, Ring Central. These are all these video conferencing, unified communication platforms that are creating new technologies to help facilitate, like Verbella, which Kurt and I were talking about something here, creating environments to really facilitate this hybrid meeting environment. And whiteboarding technology is easy to understand. You basically, this screen that I'm looking at could be a touch screen whiteboard that everyone else could see on their screen. They could bring up just that whiteboard. So we can whiteboard together live, remotely, or virtually. Acoustic fencing is really interesting, where you can have an open office plan where there's, let's pretend you have a couch and some chairs next to a couch and some chairs. And in front of those couch and chairs, there's a screen on the wall and a camera and a microphone. And as long as you're in a certain cone from that microphone, you will be heard. But if you walk next door to the other couch, you cannot be heard. So they call that an acoustic fence, which totally opens up new ways of planning office space design to make it very open, very collaborative. But while you're having a meeting, people outside of that meeting area can't be heard. And the last, I will tell you, and that's not on here, I don't think, is, oh, it is on here. The third bullet underneath unified communications, smart gallery. This is really neat. So in the conference room, which folks who are on the Zoom can't see, but you can imagine what a conference room table looks like. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people sitting at the conference room table. There's now technology that there would be a camera here behind me looking out at you all, and instead of seeing a conference room, it will recognize human faces and take them and put them in their own, I call it Brady Bunch box on the Zoom, to make it more equitable for people who are in the conference room versus people who are not. Okay, and the last thing, best practices for hybrid meetings are on the screen. And this is a checklist sort of as well. Have a remote participant lead the meeting instead of someone who is in the room. And these are just simple things. Use round robins to make sure everybody's heard, right? If you've got people who are quietly, politely sitting at home, it's hard for their voice to be heard because everybody's chatting in the room. Whoever's leading that meeting say, okay, time out. We need to hear from everybody else. And you call people by name. And would be, Jim, what are your thoughts on this? Just to make sure everybody's heard. Any other thoughts on the, well, let me keep going through a couple of these. You can buddy up remote participants with someone who's in the room. So Ross could buddy up with Kurt or Mike and say, hey, I need you to be my proxy. He might even send him a text message saying, I can't get a word in edgewise. Would you mind asking Jason to stop talking so much? I need to say something. And then you could be my proxy for that. So you could use polls, collaborative whiteboards, require that everyone has their camera on and their laptops open. If you don't have that smart gallery that I talked about that can pick up the different faces, at least everybody has their own laptop and their own face is in its own box on Zoom. And then include an asynchronous way for everyone to participate. So this actually is a whole nother topic of conversation, which is synchronous versus asynchronous working. Synchronous meaning we're here together online, working live, versus asynchronous, which is someone's asleep in India right now, but we're working on a project. I post my work in a box file or a Dropbox file. He or she works on it, and then I work on it the next morning. So that's an asynchronous versus synchronous. So that is best practices. It's a whole lot of information. you will all get the PDF so you can go through some of these checklists and use these for your own benefit later. But are there any questions and comments? We've got 4 minutes left.
One comment I have is I think it's interesting how we've taken to video conferencing technology.
Yes.
The telephone's been around since 1872. The video phone's been around since 1960. And you couldn't give a video conferencing system away until 2019.
Absolutely.
Right? And now all of a sudden, everything's got to be on video, right? And it's a mess. We have another, in a given week, I may be on 9 different video conferencing platforms.
Yes.
And if telephones are as inoperable as all those mutual systems, we'd still be using the telegraph right now. But it isn't interesting how all of a sudden with the pandemic, we've decided that an oldie timey phone call just won't do anymore.
Right.
Whereas most of us wouldn't have bothered with video, but now it's a pandemic, we've got to see each other.
Yes.
Any idea as to why that is?
That's a great question. I think it is seeing someone is typically better than not seeing someone for communication, for body language. And when you can now, that's culturally accepted that we're going to do a video conference call. That's one thing. The other is when you're setting up calls, Zoom and RingCentral and all these and Microsoft Teams are making it easy to put on your calendar a call that I click a button to open up that call, as opposed to everyone dialing into the video conference. So it's actually now easier to do a video conference than it is an old-timey audio conference call. I think those are 2 reasons why.
I thought of that, but you're right, that push button function.
We will default to the easy button every time that we can. And we need to, because our lives are moving fast and we have 100 emails that just came in.
And you may see antitrust action against Microsoft for that, right? Because remember when they had unbundled Internet Explorer because the browser was built into the operating system?
Yes.
With Teams being built in like that,
Yeah.
assuming we ever have a Department of Justice that does their job,
Yeah.
you may very well see that become forcibly dissociated from Microsoft, because it's a massive competitive advantage.
Unbelievable. That's exactly right. And every unified communications platform like Microsoft is now figuring out how to integrate, and Microsoft is letting them integrate in. So Netweavers and all these companies Vonage can integrate in where you can use their calling regular PSTN, public switch telephone network. That's the old school phones. You can use that service and their interface, which frankly, this is a personal opinion. I find Teams meetings cumbersome as a platform. I find Zoom much easier to use, and there are others as well. But they are working to integrate with Microsoft. But Microsoft could squash that at any time they wanted to. Just say we're not going to integrate with anybody anymore.
Are there any questions from the Zoom people on the chat? Or do they
Yes.
come on?
Yes. So thank you for reminding me. There's a question. Do you recommend having different cultural expectations based on their profiles?
So here's my thoughts on setting cultural expectations. It's less on the work style arrangement or the profile than it is, and this is an organizational choice. Is this going to be organization-wide we make this decision? Or it might be more to this question. If you've got certain work style arrangement or profile, there might be different teams that all have that same profile, but a team in IT is very different from a team in sales. IT is ostensibly a little bit more introverted. They'd like to be at home in their dark cave, which I fit well with that, even though I'm in sales, which is going to be my other example, I fit well with that. But whereas the salespeople might be more extroverted, so they're going to have different cultural expectations within different teams. I would recommend doing it based on teams versus profiles.
Okay.
So,
does anybody want to ask the question, like verbally? You just have to turn on the sound, the speaker.
and
You want me to do it?
I could mute. Question in the back.
So if I were to summarize what I've heard, just forgive if this is a little bit too simplistic.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But what I've heard is that the upside of the new environment, there are two major upsides. One is the freedom piece, and what it does is it ignites new opportunities for realizing freedom that weren't there before.
Yes.
And who knows all the possibilities that can come from that.
Mhm.
Okay. The other major upside is the opportunity to create a new organizational process that is adapting to some new realities, but there's some empowerment that can come from that creation exercise, some team coherence.
Yes.
All right. Is there any other major, have I missed it, or is that pretty much captured in broad sweep? The two major realities that this new environment has potential, two major aspects of the upside.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's another advantage, which is that you allow people who previously have been blocked from success in the workplace because they can't go work 40 hours a week in the office, whether it's due to health issues or family issues or whatever their lifestyle is, they can compete on a more equal ground. If I can give you 3 really jam-packed, awesome hours a day,
Mhm.
that's just as good as some 8-hour people that show up in the office that kind of aren't present. So I think that there's a lot of talent that is previously untapped and unable to be successful that can, in a hybrid environment, thrive where they couldn't in a physical environment.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny that you mentioned that, Cordelia. That also speaks to recruiting talent. You're talking about talent that previously would have a difficult time doing 40 hours a week in the office. But there's also the concept of, well, now I can recruit talent from, depending on time zones and if that's an issue, anywhere on the planet. And by the way, that was one of the big reasons why Mark Zuckerberg early on said, we will be the most forward-leaning company at our scale on remote work, because he saw it as an opportunity for talent acquisition. So that would be the other third. There may be more, but I think you've got it pretty good. You've got the employees that you do have are more engaged, which leads to greater productivity. And there's a whole, again, the whole host of benefits that I mentioned there comes from engagement. They're engaged. But I think the key, the catalyst for that engagement is this feeling of freedom. And then you have the operational, the benefits of I guess, the higher productivity from the design, the workforce workplace design. But then you've got this talent recruiting and retention piece that you didn't have before from a location, geographic location recruiting and retention.
Look, I've kind of been towards academic kinds of things, the nature of my work, right? And so I really seek to document and compare empirically, right? And I'm really curious about what I'm sure is coming, if it's not already here, it's coming down the pipe. There's going to be some really good, rigorous evaluations of work process, comparable work processes in the old environment versus the new hybrid environment, and documenting the differences in outcomes of performance. Now, question, does that exist yet?
So here's the thing, my answer to that is, yes, I believe that there is some work that's been done and is being done. It can't really exist yet with any degree of a historical context, because on this scale, it's still so new as far as the truly hybrid workforce. But my caution to anyone, and this will come as no surprise to you, is consider the source. Because, and this is counterintuitive, but I would tell you, be very wary if the source is something in the commercial real estate industry, because it is going to be biased towards why we need space for everyone to get together.
Right.
by the way, I'm a fan of space, getting together and in-person collaboration for many, many reasons. But I have just found over the months of the pandemic that I read things that come out of the large architectural firms that design office space, or large commercial real estate firms that represent a lot of landlords and owners. And then I read things coming out of the technology world that is more geared towards just because they want to sell technology to support hybrid working, and it's different numbers. And so it's like Mark Twain said, there are lies, there are damnable lies, and then there are statistics. It's the same thing here. People are going to twist those numbers. So I think people have to be very careful about what the empirical evidence that reports that they read.
We have a question from online by Christian, and the question is it possible to conduct team building activities in a remote environment? For example, virtual wine tastings.
Yes, it absolutely is. There's a number of things that were developed over the pandemic, like virtual scavenger hunts, virtual wine tastings, virtual whiskey tastings, virtual make a margarita and they could send a package to your, I mean, there's a number of things virtual. We had virtual pizza parties in our firm. So there are a number of things you could do to get people online, and that's important for people to be able to connect. But I also highly recommend, and 100% remote companies will tell you this, GitHub, I think it's, GitLab. GitLab is a great example. It's an employee organization. I think they have about 1,500 employees. They've been virtual since day one for like 15 years. But what they do is they do have an all hands meeting in person once a year so that people can get together and see each other. It's their choice, of course, but it's highly encouraged. So while you can do virtual team building activities, it's also important to schedule an opportunity to meet each other in person.
You know, one thing we're starting to do with our company, with our younger employees, they're starting to get together for online video games.
Oh,
They get
interesting.
together for like Call of Duty for like 2 hours or something.
How about that?
And doing that as a team building exercise,
That's
right?
right.
All playing the same team, encourages communication, builds camaraderie, and so forth. So,
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example. I have not heard of that yet.
You know, there's a lot of hand wringing around, and I've heard hand wringing around the loss of interpersonal contact
Right.
that comes with this hybrid environment. I'm really of the opinion that this new environment, and we're enumerating them right now, it fosters new ways of connecting that actually have a stronger result
Interesting.
of greater connection. You know, and again, I would love to see this kind of thing measured in a way that's, you know, peer reviewed, right?
Yeah.
And measured in a way that would be credible to both audiences, regardless of your perspective, what you're bringing to the table.
Right. Yeah.
I'm convinced that my hunch is that net this new environment actually can foster even a better sense of connection.
Yeah. Well, that's the concept, is not 100% remote necessarily, or what hybrid is, it's not 100% virtual, it's not 100% in person, it's both. So the idea is optimize. Let's leverage the best of both worlds. Let's try to minimize the negatives of those worlds and optimize the result. And I think so. It's a boon for really for everyone, for organizations and people.
I think what you're seeing is a separation of companies that are well managed and led. The thing that being in the office, for everything being in the office all the time, that was always a safety net. Right? If you screwed up communicating with people, you could always knock on the door and say, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you this, there's a project due in 2 days.
Yes.
Sorry.
Right.
Now, if you do that with people online, right, they may not even get your message for 6 hours and you're screwed, right? Or you take for granted the fact that you see them all the time.
That's right.
Whereas, for example, our team is 90% remote.
Right.
They come into the office only at gunpoint, which is great. Which is great. But one thing that but it means you have to be more intentional.
Yes,
right?
you
So
do.
practice we have is I make sure to have a virtual lunch with all my team members once a month. Right? I send them lunch, it just shows up at their door. We set aside
about
that time.
Yeah.
And that probably would not have happened if we were out in the office together because we take seeing each other for granted.
That's right.
But I get more value out of building that relationship in that 1 hour than I would get from 30 days of just passing people in the hall.
The term that, and this is one of the few original concepts that I've ever come up with, I coined a term called purposeful collaboration. And that's really what that is an example of, is that it can't just be happenstance ad hoc collaboration, which is what people are saying, are sort of, there's a little bit of hand wringing. We don't have that anymore in the office. And well, you need to be purposeful about when you do come into, take the time to make the commute and you're in at the office for X number of hours, be purposeful about what it is that you're doing there. And you're right, I think it does separate well-managed organizations, or really good leaders, from those that have work to do, that have some challenges and need to be more purposeful and organized about their communication.
The new hybrid environment breeds greater need for greater expression and clarity of expression of purpose.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Yes. And that's actually a benefit. Big time.
And for me, it's much more in being intentional about collaboration and getting people together, because we're fully remote with 1,500 people, I guess, now at this point.
Wow.
And so offices are designed for serendipitous relationships,
Mhm.
both the cultural side and the work side. And when you're hybrid or fully remote, you have to be much more intentional in planning that out and having strategy.
That's right.
Otherwise, it doesn't happen when people fall inside.
And that is a challenge of the remote side of hybrid that has to be dealt with. Otherwise,
When you're
it'll fail.
intentional, it's way better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
We need to
Wrap up.
wrap up.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for
Please
doing it.
stay. Hey, everybody online, everybody in person, thank you so much for coming. I realized, did you want to come up?
Yeah, I was gonna say that so you can read off the sponsors unless you know them by heart.
I do, but I would be happy to read
You
them.
got
And you'll have to resume share if you want to show something on the screen. I
Oh,
paused it
okay.
just for a moment.
Okay, I'm just gonna say the sponsors. We are here because of our sponsors. We're very grateful for our sponsors. So I wanted to thank CRI. Ross is on the Zoom here. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. Want to thank Jim Dupree and his Chapter 2 consulting, coaching, I'm sorry, Chapter 2 coaching. We have got Kennesaw State, Boyer Miller. I thought I had them all memorized. Capital Grill. I think that's it. So anyway, thank you for, at least I acknowledge there are 2 in the room. I'm sorry, we are working on our technology here for our own hybrid experience. And so each month we get a little better at this. So thank you so much for coming virtually. Thank you guys for coming live. We have got a great speaker next month, and we are actively trying to get some new membership. We have a great community of people. We hope you'll join us and be a part of our community. And thank you guys. Please feel free to stay, chat amongst yourself online. I'm going to mute us here in the room. Please feel free to stay in the room and chat. And we will see you on May 12th is our next in-person event. I need to mute us, right?